everybody, it's I, Nick Pennsylvania, and again, here I am with my good friend Bond. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, bud?
I am okay. Well, I'm just going to jump right into things. I know last time we talked some true crime, which was a little outside our purview, but because of all the mystery surrounding it, we thought that would be a good one to talk about. And it was. But now, back to something kind of the bread and butter of things. You've got a cryptid sort of story. West Virginia has, our neighbors to the immediate west and the immediate south have blessed us with such greats as Mothman, of course, which a lot of people know about thanks to the 1990s movie, which is pretty good watch, actually. I don't know if you've seen that recently.
Yeah, it's a fun movie. It's like, John Keel purists are not a lot of times fans of the portrayal, but it's a fun movie. It's George Clooney. I'm all about it.
A friend of mine, Robert, who may or may not hear this, is actually in a scene. Now, he is in the diner scene because he lives in Katanning. And of course, Katanning, Pennsylvania is where most of the movie was actually filmed. So that's only about 20 minutes down the road from where I live. 20, 25 minutes, depending on how quickly you try to drive through Worthington.
Yeah, that sounds about right. But yeah, no, if you need a proxy for a someplace in the 1960s that is modern, Katanning's not a bad spot.
No.
Because I mean things have changed obviously, but with some of the infrastructure and the mills and everything and the river there, and I can understand why someone would choose that as a location.
It's a good proxy for
right.
Anyhow, but we're not talking about Mount Pleasant, West Virginia. We're talking about Grafton, West Virginia, and we're not talking about moths or men or the synergy of moths and men. You had asked me about if I was familiar with the Grafton Monster, I think you called it, and I said, Grafton, Wisconsin, Paramount, the chair factory that made all those great records, and you said no, Grafton, West Virginia, and I know there is a Grafton, West Virginia. I'm vaguely aware. It's not that far from us. It's northern Virginia. I think it's kind of below
Morgantown, kind of
Fayette County area. Yeah.
Right. And it's the only reason I was familiar with the area beforehand was going to like Deep Creek. If you go down just straight south, some people call down south, whenever you head down like 79, right when you get to the big dead zone down there, you start to see signs for Grafton. So that's why I was familiar with the area.
Well, that makes sense. Makes perfect sense. So I'm going to hand it over to you because you only asked me earlier today. I've kind of resisted the urge to do any digging, but I did end up reading about Paramount Records again. So there we go.
Well, as is always the case, looking into one thing leads to a bunch of other research and reading and just learning stuff. But yeah, so the Grafton Monster was something that I've had on my notes for years, honestly, at this point, just because I thought it was kind of a fun story. And like you mentioned, West Virginia has a cornucopia, if you will, of just random kind of monsters. You mentioned the Mothman, obviously Flatwoods Monster is a big one. And oftentimes in that conversation, people bring up the Grafton Monster. But I think for a lot of people, that's kind of the extent of their knowledge of this kind of case. Like you mentioned, Grafton is just south of Morgantown a little ways. The town's basically an old, Baltimore Railroad junction that had a bunch of factories that, in the 50s and 60s started to close down. And the area was really trying to kind of rebound at this time in the 60s. And the time we're specifically talking about is June 16th of 1964 is when all of this started. And a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight is going to sound very reminiscent, at least to me, of things like the Loveland Frogmen story. It sounds a little bit like the Minerva monster story, things along those lines. So it has that kind of quintessential Appalachian weird creature from the 60s story kind of vibe. So basically what happened is you have a gentleman named Robert Cockrell. And again, we have the name. This is all kind of documented. So this isn't one of those real vague origin stories. We know who it was and when. So his guy's name is Robert Cockrell, and he worked for a newspaper there in town, which we're going to reference a few times here, called the Grafton Sentinel. So he was coming home late at night, heading back to his house on an area called Riverside Drive. And it's like 11 o'clock at night. He's coming down this road and he stops because he sees something in the middle or in the right side of the road that he thinks looks like a large boulder, large out of place rock that you think would roll off of a hill or something.
And
And so
again,
obviously,
not crazy to think it. I mean, West
right,
Virginia,
right,
pretty hilly. We're very familiar. Yeah.
right, yeah, not something, not a unreasonable thing to think, oh, what is this in the road? So his headlights hit it and everything. And as he's kind of getting ready to kind of go around it, the thing starts to move. And as it moves, it stands up, and he says what he sees is a 8 foot tall beast, as he calls it, with thick white, like almost like seal like skin. It's described a lot of places like it's like smooth skin, not like rough scaly skin or not hair. It's like smooth skin that looks wet. About 8 feet tall. It doesn't have a pronounced head like you hear in a lot of Bigfoot stories. This one appears to generally just kind of be shoulders almost, but it does have a humanoid shape and everything. And he mentions that it after the headlights hit it, it starts to move, and very kind of in a few of like the accounts, people talk about it moving in a very kind of methodical way is how it's reported. I take that as kind of like a purposeful, like the thing is moving not only slowly, but it's like kind of careful. It's not
See,
shambling.
when you describe that methodical movement,
Hmm.
when I think of methodical movement with regard to an animal, I thought mechanical
Well, yeah,
initially.
maybe that's a way to think of it. I think of whenever I read the word methodical in the books that I have here, I took it as almost like think of like when you see a sloth move, where yes, it's slow, but it's kind of like I got the impression it was not shambling, it wasn't like swaying, because you hear that in a lot of
Sure.
Bigfoot stories. So it's possible
I
some of those terms were used because they're antithetical to
Yeah, and I'm not trying to get weighed down in a semantic thing right now,
right.
but yeah, because when you say methodically moving, I don't think of anything walking. I think of, it's
Okay.
like a finer movement. Like I was methodically paging through a book. I was
Hmm.
methodically going through the fly kit.
Right.
I don't think like I was methodically walking to the corner store. I might say walked with purpose
With
or.
purpose, yeah. No, again,
So
if I,
I don't know.
yeah.
I heard that I thought it was like mechanic, like a
Well,
robotic sort of.
and again, like that language was quoted a few different places, so that's why I wanted to use that
Oh, I
initially.
understand.
But
I
yeah,
understand your
no.
reasoning.
So as this thing is like getting off the road, Robert does what I think most of us would do and just decides to skedaddle. He pulls around it, heads home. He gets home and decides like I need again someone who works for the newspaper. He's like I need to document this because again in 1964 there are obviously stories about like cryptids and monsters and stuff like that, but it's not like this is someone who's like ingrained in the paranormal communities at the time or anything. But he wants to document it because he's like I wonder if anybody else is seeing this thing or just even for public safety it sounds like. So what he does is he gets two of his friends, a gentleman named Bill Moser and Jerry Morse, to actually go with him back out and see if they can find this thing. They head back out and everything, and they go to the spot where he first saw it. They parked in a nearby area to see if they could see anything. They're looking out with flashlights. They didn't see the monster, but they did see what they described as tracks that were like flattened down pieces of like grass and everything. So whenever they kind of say that, I almost imagine like an elephant's like footprint, like a pad kind of coming down. Um,
Makes sense.
Right. Looked like it was flattened down like a large object, and they followed the tracks down to the to the riverbank and everything, but didn't see anything. The thing that kind of weirded them out is they kept hearing a low, faint whistling noise that none of them were familiar with. Whenever they got back to their vehicle after kind of searching the area, the car wouldn't start initially, they said, but then it was able to start after a little while. But I guess these gentlemen said that, that wasn't a normal thing for this. In the one book, it specifically says a 1956 Buick, um, saying that it had trouble starting, and that kind of weirded them out. They don't find it. They go home. Robert decides, you know what, like, I don't know if I'm going to say anything about this. He kind of goes back and forth over it. But then the next day, on June 17th, decides to start talking about it and everything with other people and kind of get it out there, hoping that someone else had seen the same thing. I can't find the initial article, and this is something we were talking about earlier, because he did work for the newspaper, but I can't find the article on June 17th with like a quote unquote initial report. We have articles specifically in the Grafton Sentinel on the 18th and 19th that refer to it almost as it's like public knowledge almost at this point. So I am unsure how the initial information from Robert and maybe his two friends, Bill and Jerry, kind of disseminated this story initially. So that's a little bit of a mystery. If anyone out there has that article, please send it over. I'd love to see it. Because the books I have them don't mention the initial article or cite it anywhere. And a lot of these other sites that I look stuff up on, who are typically very good at citing, using good MLA citing for their sources, don't have the 17th. They just have the 18th, 19th, and some of the subsequent ones. So just for full disclosure, want to throw it out there. I don't have that article to kind of read to you guys. However, we do have articles, like I said, on the 18th and 19th, which is kind of the response to these sightings. But given just that initial sighting, Nick, as far as, Robert seeing this stuff and then the three friends going out, the whistling, the car not starting, what are some of your thoughts on that real quick before we keep going?
Well, my initial thought, of course, is going to be, what could this be mistaken as? Now, I
Mm-hmm.
do find it curious that with white seal-like fur, as you said was described,
Skin, yeah.
skin,
Yeah.
not okay.
Yeah.
What I think it's funny that he mistook it for a rock.
Initially, yeah.
Yeah, this isn't happening in January or February.
Right.
Um, of course, I'm thinking of a bear and like an albino bear,
Mm-hmm.
because black bears can get in excess of like 6 foot when they're
Right.
standing, right?
Right.
And when it's rolled up, kind of huddled down, I could see it being a roundish shape,
Right. Right.
like a boulder could be.
Mm-hmm.
And I could also see somebody that's startled by it,
And
not really
if it
being
just came
very
from the
accurate
river,
in their
yeah.
height.
Right.
Yeah.
If it just came
So
from the
I'm
river and was
thinking,
wet,
there you go,
yeah.
perfect.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, these are my first impressions. Now, the only thing that gives me some pause there is when they look at the tracks. Not that I think everybody would be able to look at a bear track and be able to identify it, but
Right.
also we don't know what the soil was like where they found the
What was the
tracks. We
strata?
don't have that.
Yeah.
We don't
Mm-hmm.
know how. I mean, I think the bear populations were probably down a good bit by then. I don't know.
You'd think. Yeah, you'd think.
I do kind of instinctively think, because we know like their populations were way down in the 70s and 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So
Up here. Yeah.
again, and we don't know the people that are seeing it. And again, based on the quality of the soil, and their tracking abilities and their knowledge, we don't know if they could be mistaking bear tracks for
Right.
something. And
Right.
if the pad of the bear, the base of the print
Mm-hmm.
itself, were the only thing that were really, because that's where most of their weight's going. My understanding, I could see how that would make the impression kind of like you described like an elephant's
Yeah.
foot.
Right.
So, in a nutshell, that's my thought. I'm glad you put the bear coming out of the water, so it looked more skin-like, not fluffy sort of fur. But there we go, an
Right.
albino black bear. It's not
Right.
unheard of.
Not yeah, not out of the realm of possibility. And even like if you get like the cinnamon color phase black bears, like they are not white like a polar bear. They get pretty blonde. They really do.
Oh, they definitely. I would
Yeah.
go so far as to, if you look up images
Mm-hmm.
of, you can see like a spirit bear,
Spirit
Kermoda
bear.
bear is a subspecies. But I mean, they're not in
Oh,
West
those are cool.
Virginia.
Right.
But you can look at one of those, and it looks very much like a polar bear. But if you look up, yeah,
Right.
albino black bears,
Yeah.
there's enough that there's quite a number of photographs out there. So, yeah, that's my thoughts.
They're super cute too. I'm
I
not
won't argue
surprised.
that.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Um, like when you look at an animal up for the first time and like all the images pop up and you're just like overwhelmed with like how cool something is. You're just like, I didn't realize this existed. I'm so glad it's out there. That's how I feel looking at pictures of albino black bears for the first time. So yeah, no, I think I'm right there with you on the kind of interpretation. I do think it's interesting. There's a little bit of like the woo factor with like the low whistling, which
Yeah, I
again
forgot about that part.
again could be anything, but if it's something that they noted, that's worth noting too.
Right, but maybe I'm saying too, if you're, and you know this, you've experienced this, you go to a place, something weird has
Oh
happened
yeah,
here,
yeah,
you're kind of tuned into anything.
for
So,
sure.
and is this a sound that's being misattributed? Because it's
That's
not like they heard it come from this thing.
from right, right, exactly, and it didn't help them locate it or anything. That would be
Right.
that
And
would
none
be
of these
different.
guys, we don't know if one of these guys is like Mark Trail or something. So
Right, yeah,
again,
yeah.
the, right.
Yeah, no, I think everything you're saying there makes a lot of sense. And it is weird that the car didn't start and it normally did start on the first try, but like any carbureted engine,
Yeah,
like
as a person that's driven,
yeah,
my first two cars were both carbureted, and
right.
it was either they were so old that it was before. There was this weird thing in the 80s where it was kind of a mix of both worlds. It was carbureted but
Right.
also fuel injected.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, in the carburetor days, for people that aren't hip to it, you did have to wait for your car to warm up. You had to
Right.
start your car, and you had to sit there for like 5 honest minutes at least, sometimes a little more, because if you start to pull out, you might back up a few inches, you might get the car into
Yeah.
drive, and then it would stall out.
It just stalls out. Exactly.
Right. And if
So
you started again and try to drive and it would stall out again, well, you ran the risk of flooding your engine. And at that
mhm.
point, you just have to like decide,
Let's
well, I guess I'm not going anywhere
anywhere for
because
a
I'm
while. Yeah.
impatient. So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's
yeah,
a
I've often wondered about back in the day, fire departments and things like that, if they just
what do you think?
would idle it. Because here's the other thing.
Seriously. Yeah.
If you let your car warm up, drove for like 20 minutes, went to a
Hmm.
friend's house, sat around for an hour, and then went to leave, you didn't have to wait for your car to warm up then.
Right.
But
Right.
if you drove for like an hour and then sat around for 6 or 7,
Hmm.
you probably have to wait for it to warm up
Yeah,
again.
yeah. So I mean, I don't know if that initially has a paranormal lean to it,
Right.
but
How long
again,
were they out in the woods looking? I don't
right?
know.
Yeah, but worth noting, I think. So somehow this information gets disseminated around town. Again, it's kind of a lot of these other blue collar towns that we have in the area. So not a huge place, but not small either. And
Yeah. I
and
mean, it's like, I was looking it up now since we've been talking.
yeah,
It is the county seat of
right.
Taylor County. So
Hmm.
nowadays it's like around 5,000 people.
Yeah. Do they
So
have census data from the 60s? I'm
I'll
not
let
good.
you know in just a moment here. But I know, for example, Nesta,
Hmm.
which we both know,
Right. Very well.
I think they are. Now, again, Nesta is the county seat of Forest County,
Hmm.
Emporium is the county seat of Cameron County, and both those counties have less than 5,000 people.
Right. Total. Yeah.
Right, the whole county. So, okay, let me see if they've got. Okay, census data. 1960, it was just shy of 6,000 people. 1970, it was about 6,500
Okay. So,
people. And so then in 1980, it seems to have peaked just shy of 7,000.
mm,
So right now, the current estimates place it between around its 1,900 population. So
okay.
there you go.
Go. Yeah. So so not a small place, by any
Certainly
stretch.
not a small
Yeah.
place by
Yeah.
West Virginia standards
Right,
either.
right. Yeah, by regional standards.
Right.
So word does get around one way or the other. People start going crazy looking for this thing. And what we have is an article from the 18th talking about that day. So this is from again, this is from the Grafton Sentinel from June 18th, 1964.
My
And it's
birthday.
yes, yep.
Yeah.
Um,
About 20 some years
right,
before.
yeah. But yeah, so it says, want to go monster hunting? If so, join the roving bands of teenagers who are apparently convinced that a monster, in quotes, exists and is roving the section of Riverside Drive near the city's stone quarry. Wednesday night, several bands of teenagers armed with flashlights, mallets, crowbars, and the like were reported searching the Riverside Drive area. The
How did
description of
Boris Pickett not have a song about this?
right? Yeah, no, agreed. Um, The description of the alleged Grafton Monster sounds suspiciously like that of recent reports of a monster in Michigan, except the Graftons seems to be a bit bigger in every respect. One teenager said that the youths on Wednesday night were searching for the creature 9 feet tall and about 4 feet wide. He said it is agreed that the creature is white, has no discernible head, and emits a weird whistling sound. So far as could be ascertained today, area law enforcement officials have taken no official notice of reports of the Riverside Drive monster. Several teenagers, none of them identified by name, have reportedly seen the monster and given fairly telling reports of its appearance. The tale is even embellished with the theory that the creature was first sighted in the Morgantown area and arrived in the Riverside area via the Monongahela and Taggart rivers. One youth suggested that it might be an escaped polar bear, but offered no suggestions as to where such an animal could have escaped.
Yeah, because again, like I'm not trying to rag on West Virginia. I love the
Right.
place. I really
We
do.
do. Yeah. No, big
Spent a
fans.
lot of
Yeah.
time there. Big
Yeah.
big fans. Not a lot of zoos.
Not a lot of zoos. Yeah.
No.
Especially in the 60s. Yeah.
Right.
Um,
You're if you're going for a zoo and you're living in West Virginia, you're going to go to Pittsburgh.
mhm.
You're going
Right.
to go to DC or Baltimore, depending on where you're at. You might even go to Harrisburg, PA.
Right.
It's pretty spread. You might go somewhere in Ohio. Again, it really depends on where at you are in West Virginia. But I mean, the bottom line is, I mean, Charleston, Morgantown, these are like your major population centers.
Centers.
And
Yeah.
the why is I recently listened to a whole thing about why isn't there a huge industry outside of like your traditional coal mining and stuff like that in West Virginia. A lot of it has just to do with the fact that there's not a lot of flat space.
There's
So
not.
yeah,
Yeah.
bottom
Yeah.
line, not a lot of zoos. How the polar bear? I agree. Kid, I mean
Yeah.
I like he's
It's
going with it, but
yeah.
I'm not digging it.
I'm glad that he's thinking about, but like again, a polar. Here's the thing too: is like let's say, like as two people who are into these things, I can understand someone being like, "Oh, there's like a monster sighting. Let's all hop in, the '57 Buick and head down to Riverside Drive and see if we can rustle up a monster." I can understand why someone would do that. If someone says, "Hey, there is a possibility that it is in fact not a monster, but a 10-foot tall, 1,500-pound escaped polar bear. I'm not going anywhere near that.
I'm in agreement with you here.
I'm not going anywhere near that.
I mean, even if you're in a now a Roadmaster,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is a car whose name delivers. But
it does. Yeah.
I don't want to get in a fight with a polar bear, even in a Roadmaster.
Even in a Roadmaster. Yeah. You're not gonna 9 times out of 10, it's not gonna go in your favor.
No, sir.
And especially with what insurance was back then, like any
was there?
like I'm sure there was, but any kind of claw related damage, bite related damage is probably not going to be I guess at that point you'd have to say you could probably argue for that because again the polar bear shouldn't be there.
It would be my Clarence Darrow moment.
It would be.
It'd be my Inherit the Wind. Like,
oh my god. So everyone's having a great time on Riverside Drive, looking for this monster. People keep coming. I'm sorry. Let me actually back up real quick. In that article, did you catch what they said about the monster in Michigan? The reports.
Apparently it was kind of similar, except that it was a total wuss.
Right. Yeah.
Didn't work out.
It was just like not quite as cool.
Quite as cool.
What they're referring to is there was some sightings on June 11th. Just because I think this is important. There was on June 11th, just a few days earlier, up in where was that? It was in Michigan. The Dewey Lake Monster was sighted on the 11th, just a few days earlier, and this one there was a lot of people getting really excited about this one because it was apparently like a Bigfoot type creature, like it was an ape by a lot of accounts. One of the news clippings I found says 3 girls were reported terrorized this morning by an animal they said fit the description of a monster seen by residents in the Dewey Lake area. The teenagers said they saw the creature near Swisher Street and Town Hall Road. The 3, Joy Smith, 13, Patsy Clayton, 12, and Gail Clayton, 13, rushed to a nearby house to call for help. Joyce fainted when she saw the creature but was quickly revived. None of the girls were hurt. The local police chief, Richard Wild, said the girls called his office and notified Cass County Sheriff deputies. 2 sheriff's cars and a conservation car were sent to the scene. A state police plane was also called into the search, which, like, if true, that's a pretty intense response to like a claim by some young kids.
I am in agreement with you on this.
So,
and they mustered a plane pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, real quick, just based on the 2020 census, the largest population city by population in West Virginia is Charleston, the state capital, under 50,000 people, okay? By that, Grafton ranks number 34. Number 34 in rank by population. With, again, where are we at here real quick? With, according to the 2020 census, 4,700 people. To put that in perspective, number 34 here in Pennsylvania is Phoenixville.
Okay.
Care to guess how many people live in Phoenixville?
I couldn't tell you to save my life.
20,000.
Really, that many?
That many?
I would have been way off. I would have said 12, 13. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
No, but that's good information.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to a city in Pennsylvania that has a comparable population as Grafton. This is totally unnecessary to the story in any meaningful way. Context. But we'd go not too far. We'd go to California, Pennsylvania.
Okay. And
just quick guess, where do you think ranking-wise that places it in Pennsylvania's cities by population?
Cities by population.
Yeah. California, PA. Grafton, again, was number 34 in West Virginia.
Out of 50, you said.
Yeah, just top 50. Well, no, not out of 50. Not out of 50.
But they're in the top 50.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to say Cal is 80th, 84th, we're going to say.
Not even close. See? By a country mile. 277th. 277th.
In the state?
in the
Jeez.
Commonwealth of
Okay.
Pennsylvania,
It's Commonwealth.
277.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and so again, yeah,
I
not
think that is such a big area though, but I guess okay. I guess that okay
yeah.
makes sense.
Again, it is, but
Yeah.
it's again, so 5,000 people. That's
Yeah.
a big place for West Virginia standards.
Right.
So just
Comparatively.
kind of driving home the fact that they got a plane mustered together. Now, I wonder though if again, if you're one of like 5 to 6,000 people in a
Hmm.
town, you write for a newspaper, you don't know everybody in town, but
Hmm.
you're only one or two people removed from
Removed from just
knowing
about everybody.
everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think in a place like that, somebody that the community generally goes, yes, that's a credible person.
Hmm. Right.
I think that's why. I think if we were talking about a place, like Erie, PA,
Right.
you know, people wouldn't be so quick to. I mean, you'd still have the roving gangs of kids. You're gonna get
Right.
that. You don't need a.
Any
They were
right.
doing that anyway.
Yeah, well, you get on 5 there and you just go up and down all night,
Right.
cruising. So
119
yeah.
rolls right through
Yeah.
town. So bottom line is, yeah, I think the population is an important thing to consider here
Hmm.
because again, if you're talking about a credible, vaguely respected person in town, that word's going to carry a lot more, and they have much more access to. There's amenities that a place of any consequence is going to have. So yeah, there we
Right.
go. That's
Right.
my 2 cents on there.
But
And the kid said polar bear. If he just said
yeah.
albino bear,
Yeah.
so
I'd be
close to the
yeah.
mark.
Right. Yeah. He's kids halfway there. But yeah, so I think that in this first article, a lot of good information. I think comparing it to this Dewey Lake Monster makes a lot of sense because it was just a few days earlier. People heard about it, and again, like just with a cursory, search with this Dewey Monster thing, it sounds like people went bananas. People were coming from different states to look for this thing. People were hiding all of their animals in their barns and everything and not letting them out. People were giving out rewards for a capture of the monster, dead or alive.
I mean,
Like
people
it,
aren't hiding their animals in the barn.
well, they're
That's
keeping
just where
them.
you keep
Yeah.
them.
Well, but if you
I
put
know
if
what
you
you mean.
put
I'm making
right,
fun.
right. But I think that you could hide if you had like if someone said, "Hey, I have 12 sheep, can you hide them?" That's hard. Like that's a hard thing to do, I bet.
Well, I mean, if you had
Or
12 sheep, I
goats.
would hope that you had the facilities for
Yeah,
which to
well, to
keep
like
them.
keep them, but you're right, hiding them like they use in this one article I'm looking at. Yeah,
I'm glad it came from the article and not from you, because
no, it's
otherwise
a
I'd be
quote.
making fun of you
No,
all night about that.
right? No, that. I mean, I'm
You
not.
know where I hide my clothes, Brendan? In my closet. And I have this dresser thing. It's got all these drawers. Now, if you look at it, you might not know that if you pull on those handles, there's clothes in there.
Really,
That's
every
where I
drawer,
hide my clothes.
every drawer is a hidden drawer.
You're an
If
idiot.
you're an
Yeah.
idiot, if you're trusting.
If you grew up in a house that you just
Yeah,
put handles on random
yeah,
wooden tables,
right.
you know. Like
That being,
I hate
yeah.
kitchens where there's handles, like under the sink. There's a handle. It
Mhm.
makes it look like there's a drawer right under the
But it
sink.
doesn't actually. It's just a
No, because it couldn't,
yeah,
because where your pipes go,
right.
So don't do that.
Yeah,
All right,
one
sorry.
one of the many reasons
I can't
that
believe we
modern, yeah,
recorded where I hide all my clothes.
so
If I'm
personal.
missing any socks now, I'm going to be very
Yeah,
suspicious. What have I done?
where it happened. So, but so yeah, compared to this Dewey Lake Monster, I think that is important to remember. Like people were in the habit of kind of going kind of nuts at the time, and we saw that with the Loveland Frogman episode. We saw that with some of the Flatwoods Monster stuff, and in other, especially Bigfoot related stories at the time. You have people just being like, "Oh, let's go find the monster," kind of thing. So the next day, on the 19th, we have another article from the Grafton Sentinel here. I'm gonna read real quick, and I just love the candor of some of these, some of how some of this is written. Like some people,
I love your statement. People back then are just in the habit of going nuts, as we've seen. So I'm
Yeah,
here
like
for this
that's
article.
yeah, like that's specific to the 60s. Not happening all the time now.
This is a fun time. There's only three TV stations, and
Right, yeah,
you're
there's less to
probably only
do.
getting two in West Virginia.
Right, if you're lucky. The clouds are bouncing it right.
Right, a lot of
Okay,
mountains.
so June 19th, 1964, Grafton Sentinel. Grafton's alleged monster, reportedly the personification of the active imaginations of a number of teenagers, couldn't have shown up in the Riverside Drive area if it wanted to on Thursday night, as too many teenagers and adults were roaming that section of the city. At approximately 10 p.m., it was reported that cars were almost bumper to bumper along the River Drive, and a large number of cars were pulled off the road to permit joining the area's most popular sports in recent history to monster hunting. Some 20 reports from persons allegedly seeing the monster have been quoted since Tuesday night, when the all-white creature without a discernible head first was reportedly seen near the city's stone quarry. Wednesday night, about 30 teenagers engaged in a monster hunt, but by Thursday night, the number of teenagers had doubled and a number of adults had joined in the action. A combination of spring fever, lack of area recreational facilities, and recent publicity given a Michigan town which claims to have a monster, which followed people are believed to have laid the basis for the wildly imaginative story about the Grafton Monster. A route check by the Sentinel shows that the monster story may have resulted from the fact that an individual pushing a handcart loaded high with boxes walked along the riverside on Tuesday night. In the half light of late evening, this person in loaded handcart apparently took on a weird shape for the persons having just read the story of the Michigan Monster. And it is fairly certain that monsters don't go around pushing handcarts loaded with boxes.
I recall nothing of the original that mentioned a hand cart. I'm
Right,
sure if I thought I mistook, I I thought it was a rock, and
right.
then I realized it was an all white 9 foot tall person pushing a hand cart. Like I wouldn't have mixed of all that.
Right.
Because I'm not being really silly. I mean, I am a little
Or
bit, but I
kind of,
want you to
yeah.
think about Brendan. You're out in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
You hear a weird thing.
As often happens. Yep.
Oh my God! It's finally happened. There he is. There's
There it
Bigfoot.
is.
He's about 40 yards ahead of you. Okay, so there's a
Ooh,
little bit
okay.
of a distance,
Yeah.
but you notice blowing on a pinwheel. Now, are you going to forget the pinwheel? No.
No, I feel like that's an important
No.
detail.
No,
Yeah.
it is. No, okay, because it's not just that you're seeing this thing, like this isn't all right. Okay,
It's
okay.
twofold.
Let me
Yeah.
back up. It's not a Bigfoot. It's not. You're not primed for this.
Right.
It's a half snake, half guinea pig.
Oh God. Okay.
Right. I know. And I know what you're thinking, Nick. That's just a snake eating a guinea pig. No, the half that's guinea pig is the feet. Okay, now, yeah, that is okay. I'm looking for a reasonable explanation, and okay, I have to owe an apology to the kid that said polar bear
Right.
because
Because
that is definitely the stupidest.
right.
Either I want to know what this man's driving eyeglass prescription is and why he's not wearing them. If he's going to mistake a man pushing a hand cart laden with boxes and be like, I thought it was a rock, but then I realized that rock was actually a 9 foot tall, all white beast with sable like fur. No, that is the dumbest. My friends and I, we went out and noticed these bear like, elephant like prints, but there's also these two lines that were parallel to one another that seemed to go on for yards. This is dumb.
It's a dumb. Yeah. It's a
It's a
really like.
dumb
I
explanation.
think it is a very obvious. Whoever is in the police chief or something, goes to the newspaper and says, "Hey, we need to stop having all these people over here. like run an article saying like it's certainly a hoax kind of thing.
Yeah,
We're not hoax.
and
We're just like it's not a monster. It's not a monster. It's not a monster. Don't make fun of it. Just
don't
shut
make
it
fun
off.
of it.
Yeah,
Because I
just like
was going
shut
to
it
say,
off.
when the
Yeah,
article started out, it
it
sounded like
does.
it was
Yeah,
taunting it to show
it does.
itself.
Yeah, like it couldn't show up even if it wanted to. Like
Like
even
those,
if
what are those
yeah,
Ghost Adventures guys that are always trying to
yeah,
taunt
right, yeah,
things that aren't
yeah,
there? Yeah,
right,
and I'm like, oh, this is a funny turn. Like now they're like,
yeah,
it's like what they show in movies and books. Like we need to lure the serial killer out by taunting it, by publishing things in the paper.
yeah. And it's like
Like there's monsters out there in the woods are reading a
reading.
paper.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I do like the
It
idea.
has a subscription.
Yeah, I like the idea of like a Grafton Monster with like no head, but like still like the little glasses.
I want to
Like,
get this picture.
yeah, like reading the Grafton Sentinel. And just being like,
Fuming.
how dare they?
Right. Of course they haven't seen me. They're out on the road,
Yeah,
bumper to bumper.
just
So no, I mean, like, okay, I think it's a totally reasonable thing for you to say, like, hey, we need to like kind of calm things down, put something. Let's utilize our resources, put something in the paper, trying to get people like, all right, let's walk this back a little bit. All of this sounds great, but somebody, presumably with an English background, has read some stories,
yeah,
concocted that. You know what? I would have
yeah,
gladly accepted a handcart late because this is June. This
yeah.
is sheep shearing season.
Right,
The triple S and a
right,
handcart laden with sheared wool from various sheeps.
right.
I mean, I still would have been like, that's how I would have
I don't.
immediately
Yeah,
been looking up how regular was sheep farming in the West
in the
Virginia.
yeah.
But that's just, I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
can't
it's
let go
yeah.
of this. It's so dumb.
Like yeah, like that's the thing is like you'd think if they wanted to though, like just like squash it, they would have just been like, "Hey, Robert Cockrell came out and said like, hey, it's not real. I didn't see it," or something or come up with something that like desensationalizes it.
I
Like
would have
if
told you exactly what I've done.
what would
Okay.
you have done? I'm curious.
I would have said, you know what town I hate? Bridgeport. Bridgeport is a little to the west,
Yeah,
right by Clarksburg.
yeah,
Nutter Fort. Oh, that's where I'm going. I'm saying, you know, earlier this week on Tuesday, there was a sighting. It was over at this other lake a few days before. You know, everybody here has been on the lookout, but nobody's really seeing anything. We have recently heard of a supposed sighting in Nutter Fort area. And now they have to deal with that. A lot of these yahoos and Grafton, and some of them maybe are like, hey, we got to protect our own. All of our sheep are at risk.
right.
We're
Yeah.
having to hide them in every nook and cranny of the barn. We're running out of space for our sheep, for our clothes. I can't build drawers fast enough. And those people are going to rule themselves out. They're like, you know what?
Right.
It's those nutters out in Nutter
This is
Fort.
a Nutter Fort problem. This is not a
Right.
Grafton
This
problem.
thing's on the move.
Yeah.
So
The good people
that's
of Grafton,
what I
West
would've done.
Virginia, don't have. Yeah, exactly. They don't have the
But
time of
no,
day.
that's
for
not
this.
what they got. I mean, these people
Yeah.
deserve more. These people have subscriptions to the Grafton Sentinel, and it's
Right.
treating them like they're dum-dums.
It is.
I don't.
It
I
is.
have no
think
respect for this. This is why so many people are losing confidence in American journalism. I think
Journalism.
the
This is where.
flashpoint
Yeah, this is
right
definitely. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
can't. That is like, you know.
It's such a
There's some
bad,
people that
like,
say,
yeah.
"Well, skeptical people are a humorless bunch." Like that. There you go.
Right. Right.
Oh, I'm
So
sorry.
so and it's interesting too because like the original gentleman, Robert Cockrell. So he kind of like going on down the road. He does take this seriously enough that he contacts Gray Barker, who we haven't spoken about enough on this show, given how much we talk about John Keel and other like historic Fortean researchers. So he was real involved with like a lot of the stuff in Point Pleasant and Mothman. He's kind of where a lot of the Men in Black stuff come from. He was a contemporary to Keel.
I'm not super familiar with him. I
Oh,
have to
really?
admit.
Okay, so
No.
we'll have to do a deep dive. The guys from the Moth Boys podcast have done a lot of work on like the Gray Barkers. He has like a whole like library somewhere down in West Virginia that is being like worked on. There's some really interesting stuff, but that being said, he also does have a bit of a dubious reputation
Sure.
for like I don't want to say like hoaxes, but like maybe some sensationalism and
Come on, you chase after shadowy things.
right, yeah,
Most
like
people, you're going to, even if you have the best of intentions, even if
tensions,
you're the
right.
straightest. But then if I'm assuming trying to sell some
Mhm.
books on the
Right,
side there
right,
too.
exactly,
I get it.
exactly. So like, so yeah, I don't know enough about Gray Barker to comment on his to comment on that element of it yet. Um, but some people see, oh, this guy reached out to Gray Barker. That gives it some legitimacy. Other people say, oh, well, of course Gray Barker was into this. It was a dumb cryptid sighting, you know?
That makes perfect sense.
Right. Yeah. So
The
like
way you're
both
cutting
sides.
that, perfect
Yeah.
sense.
But it does show that at the very least that this Robert Cockrell gentleman was serious enough to like follow up with investigators after the fact. And from what I can find online, there are stories that both Gray Barker and other folks have picked up after the fact about this same creature. A lot of them are very similar. They're people seeing, this thing just kind of passing in the night kind of thing. And a lot of people use the same descriptions like 8 to 10 feet tall, super wide, white, like seal like almost wet looking skin, moving in the same manner, which I think is interesting. The fact that they're saying, oh, it's moving the same way, because it sounds so different from other, indigenous creatures. And other folks, obviously, in the same area, look at the connections between this thing and possible UFO sightings. And the UFO sighting kind of connection is interesting because people are making the connection between UFOs and weird things all over the place at this point. So I'm not surprised to see that, especially after the fact. But so it is interesting that the guy did kind of keep going on with it. Now, that being said, apparently, late in his life, Robert Cockrell did recount his story, saying that it was a hoax. But he kept it going for a long time before that, after, whenever it wasn't like he had a lot to gain from it. So make of that what you will. But so a lot of people think this is an interesting story that is kind of almost this like snapshot of not only the state of the cryptozoological community and like Fortean community at the time, but also just culturally, the fact that people were so into going out and looking for these things. And there was a sensationalist element about it, which I think is just interesting because I'm not sure what elements of that translate today and which ones don't, if any.
Well, I had to step aside actually because I was reminded of a story we talked about a long time ago. And I was trying to find it exactly. But it comes from an old collection put out by the University of Kentucky, 1965. I
Okay.
have this book. It is the Telltale Lilac Bush and other West Virginia ghost tales.
Oh, that's cool.
And
Okay.
and again, I brought something from this before, and I'm trying to find. There's some headless stuff. Okay,
Nice.
right. Okay, but there was a white death, and
Ooh.
let me come back to that. But there's a whole chapter on headless ghosts and of
Oh,
whitish things,
really?
whitish beasts. Here's a large white dog. Here it is. I think this may have been the one. So, one dark evening about 100 years ago, my great grandfather had a strange experience. Again, I'm just reading directly
Mm-hmm.
a snippet from this book. So this places it right around the end of the Civil War. He was in the Randolph County. Now, I do not know where Randolph County is in relationship to Taylor County, where
Looking.
this is, but I don't suppose it's ultra important. But just the same, I'm going to look it up on a map. and Randolph.
It's southeast of
Okay, it's
Grafton.
right by Elkins, where
Yeah.
I spent a good bit of time. Elkins is one of my favorite towns in all the world.
Hmm.
That is where the town of Elkins is actually where I got my hair cut by a blind barber.
That's a very Nick statement. I
Yeah, and
believe it.
it was the greatest time I ever had. He had like one really milky eye, and there were two guys in there. This is when I was down doing the violin building apprentice
Okay,
thing.
yeah.
So I was at
Okay.
Davis and Elkins College, and the two guys in there were really having a row about the
Mm-hmm.
mayor and his
Ooh.
dog, which sounds like the most West Virginia thing ever, but
Right.
it's actually a very cosmopolitan little town. I really dug it. But anyway,
That's cool.
so this is out by Elkins, a bit south of there. Anyway, he was riding, great grandfather was riding his horse back from a small country store somewhere in Randolph County around Mill Creek. He heard something that sounded like a log chain falling from a tree, and he felt the presence of something on the horse behind him. Frightened out of his wits, but he turned his head to see what the thing was. First, he saw a long claws that were digging into the flesh of his shoulder. He thought that a bear had jumped on him or jumped behind him on his horse, but turning his head farther around, he found himself staring straight into two fire red eyes. The creature had hardly any nose, but there were two protruding objects on his head that looked like horns.
Ooh.
So, and it goes on from there. Basically, he came within sight of his house. The strange thing happened. To his other surprise, the thing just disappeared. Now, we'd have to go back and listen to some of our early
Mm-hmm.
things. I believe we had this conversation with Mike when Mike was.
I believe so. Yeah.
But it was a different story because it was somebody fighting with a large white animal of some
Mm-hmm.
kind.
Yeah. I
And
do remember that.
but it was like a chimerical in the fact that it too just kind of disappeared at some point. But the bottom line is there seems to be something thematic in West Virginia. So
Right.
sorry, it just for whatever reason, all of a sudden something struck my memory and
Yeah.
it came out there.
Well, and again, it's funny because a lot of this sounds so much like the Loveland Frogmen stuff. It really is. It really is similar, and I think there's stuff like this that happens all over the place. And I think it's interesting because it really does give us like a snapshot of like when these weird things happen and what it does to a small town. Not a small town, but just like a
Oh
community.
yeah, it's a community.
But a community, like one like kind of unit. But yeah, so I think the Grafton Monster is an interesting one. I think that I really hope that it starts to get a little bit of more play because I think it's a cooler story than people give it credit
Yeah.
for.
I don't know if it's George Clooney movie.
Nah,
Yeah.
it's
But no, but here's
Yeah.
here's a real thing, and I do want to know this. Was there ever any additional stories and sightings? Like there are occasional, not just to keep it in West Virginia, but there are occasional Mothman things. There are others like the Loveland Frogland, where there are people claim to see long after the initial incidents, even if it's just a smattering.
Yeah, it's
Was there anything more?
yeah. So I mean, apparently Gray Barker does have stuff. I didn't see anything that sounded exactly like this from the area. He has a lot of UFO related stuff and stuff that's definitely Bigfoot related. I didn't see anything that sounded exactly like the Grafton Monster, but it might be out there. It might be out there. So yeah, that's the Grafton Monster. If you have any thoughts on what else this could have been, because I do like the idea of it having a mundane explanation, whether that's a
Yeah.
polar bear or if you think it
How
was
many
a
boxes?
cart. How many
Yeah.
boxes at a cart do you think it would
Before you're
take?
just stunned.
Right. Well, because if
So
someone's coming,
your brain has trouble
Right.
processing.
like,
And
yeah,
like that can't be that many boxes. That must
it can't be. Yeah, it can't be a 10-foot tall cart of boxes. Like that's
Right.
like yeah. How many is it for you?
That
but
would
so
be
if you
difficult to tote. So sorry.
it
I'll
would.
shut
Yeah.
up.
Well, yeah. It's no.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not nothing.
Make 2 trips.
Right. This is a good lesson to live by. But yeah, so if you have any thoughts on this, we'd love to hear about it. You can find us on Instagram or Facebook at the Ghost Furnace Podcast, or you can send us an email at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com.